He walked into a luxury car dealership just looking for a car. Minutes later, he was humiliated, punched, and thrown out. No one knew the man they mocked was Keanu Reeves. But when the truth came out, what he did next would shake the entire nation and leave even his attacker in tears. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The morning light spread gently across Los Angeles, washing over the streets with that soft golden hue that only California seems to know. The city was stirring awake, its rhythm a blend of honking cars, humming engines, and the faint chatter of people rushing to start their day. Amid the bustle, one man walked without hurry. His steps were unhurried, his face calm, almost meditative. It was Keanu Reeves. He wore what he always did on ordinary days: faded jeans, a black t-shirt, and an old leather jacket with creases that told 1,000 quiet stories. His boots were scuffed, his hair slightly messy from the morning breeze, and there was a kind of stillness about him that made him blend into the crowd rather than stand out from it. People passed by, some recognizing him with a startled glance, others completely unaware that one of Hollywood's most admired men was walking right beside them. Those who did recognize him hesitated, unsure whether to approach. He gave them the same simple smile he always did. A gentle nod, a small wave. Then he continued walking, coffee cup in hand, as if the world around him was just another scene in a long, quiet film. He had stopped earlier at his favorite cafe on Sunset Boulevard, the kind of place that never changed. The wooden counter still bore the scratches from years of use, and the smell of roasted beans lingered in the air like a familiar embrace. "Morning, Oliver," he had said to the barista, a young man who'd been Stace, working there since college. "The usual?" Oliver had asked, already reaching for the espresso machine. "Yeah, the usual," Keanu had replied, smiling faintly. There was comfort in the repetition, in the small rituals that anchored him to normal life. Outside, he paused near the cafe window to watch the world move by. His reflection blended with the city behind the glass, a man of contradictions, known by millions, yet invisible by choice. He sipped his coffee slowly, savoring the warmth. The taste reminded him of early mornings on movie sets, back when he was still uncertain about his future. It also reminded him of someone else, a man who once stood beside him when the world didn't believe in him yet. That man's name was Jake Lawson, a stuntman who had doubled for Keanu in his early action films. Jake was fearless and funny, the kind of person who could make danger look like an art form. Years ago, during a stunt gone wrong, Jake had risked his life to protect Keanu from a collapsing rig. The accident changed both of them. Jake's body recovered, but his career never did. Keanu never forgot that moment, nor the quiet courage of his friend. Now, years later, Jake was gone, lost to a sudden illness that took him too soon. What remained was a promise Keanu had made at his funeral, to do something in Jake's memory that would keep his spirit alive. That promise was why he walked the streets today, not searching for fame or luxury, but for something with meaning. Keanu continued down the sidewalk, the hum of the city forming a rhythm beneath his quiet thoughts. His eyes drifted toward the cars passing by, sleek, modern machines that glided effortlessly down the road. Yet, he wasn't looking for something new. What he wanted was something that carried history, a story within its metal and leather. He had been searching for months for a vintage car to restore and auction in Jake Lawson's name. The idea wasn't about collecting or showing off. It was about turning nostalgia into purpose, using something old and forgotten to bring hope to others. Jake had loved classic cars. He used to say that restoring them was like bringing a soul back to life. "Every dent has a memory," he once told Keanu. "You just have to listen closely enough." Those words stayed with him. That's why, even with all the fame and fortune surrounding his career, Keanu still spent hours browsing online forums, old car auctions, and neighborhood garages, looking for the right one. He wasn't interested in perfection. He wanted authenticity, something real, something human. As he turned a corner, the city opened up into a wide boulevard, lined with palm trees swaying gently under the early sun. The traffic was light, and the sky stretched endlessly overhead, painted with streaks of orange and blue. It was one of those mornings where the world felt open, ready to offer something if you were willing to see it. He passed a few small shops, nodded politely to a man sweeping the sidewalk, and smiled at a woman walking her dog. Every person he greeted reminded him why he still loved this city. Los Angeles wasn't just about fame and flash. Beneath the surface, it was a place full of dreamers, people who built their lives on fragile hope. He had been one of them once, a struggling actor taking the bus to auditions, living off instant noodles. Sometimes when he walked like this, those memories returned, not to sadden him, but to remind him of how far he'd come and what really mattered. Up ahead, something caught his eye, a glint of sunlight reflecting off glass. Across the street stood a luxury car dealership he hadn't noticed before. It was new, sleek, with a towering glass facade that gleamed under the morning light. The name above the door read, Cole & Whitman Automotive. The showroom beyond the glass looked like another world. Spotless white floors, chrome finishes, cars positioned like works of art. For a moment, he hesitated. He wasn't dressed for a place like that. But then, he reminded himself why he was out here, to find something meaningful. He didn't care about appearances. He just wanted to see if, by chance, they had something rare tucked away in a corner, something with history. He crossed the street, the sound of his boots tapping softly against the asphalt, unaware that this single decision would set off a chain of events that would change more than just his day. It would change lives. As Keanu reached the dealership doors, the cool air from inside brushed against his face, carrying the faint scent of new leather and polished chrome. The automatic doors opened with a soft chime, and he paused for a second, taking in the scene. Everything inside gleamed floors so clean they reflected the ceiling lights, cars arranged like jewels in a display case. The quiet hum of soft jazz filled the air, blending with the low murmur of conversation. He stepped inside, moving slowly, his coffee still warm in his hand. Employees in crisp suits glanced up briefly before returning to their screens, their eyes flickering with mild curiosity, then dismissal. He didn't fit the usual image of the clientele who walked through those doors. He didn't care. His attention was drawn to a car positioned at the far end of the showroom, a deep, metallic gray Mustang, its body curved with timeless grace. It looked almost out of place among the futuristic sports cars and glossy electric models. Something about it stopped him. The car had history, soul. It reminded him of the stories Jake used to tell, the long desert drives, the feeling of freedom when the world fell away behind you. Keanu walked toward it slowly, his boots silent on the carpet. He placed his cup down on a nearby counter and traced a hand lightly along the edge of the car's hood. The cold metal sent a ripple through his chest. He could almost hear Jake's voice again, laughing, telling him that a car like this wasn't about status, but about stories. He smiled faintly. He didn't know why, but he felt drawn to it as if fate had quietly guided him to this exact place, this exact moment. Outside, traffic roared past, indifferent to what was unfolding inside. But for Keanu, everything was still. He didn't notice the stares from across the room or the whispered remarks beginning to circulate. His focus was fixed entirely on the car that seemed to carry the memory of a friend and the beginning of something unexpected. The moment Keanu stepped deeper into the dealership, the warmth of the California morning seemed to vanish. The air inside was colder, sharper, almost metallic. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the atmosphere. Every detail in the showroom screamed luxury. Silver accents gleamed beneath the soft glow of spotlights. The faint scent of polished leather and expensive cologne filled the air. Every surface sparkled, but not one person smiled. A row of employees stood behind a long marble counter, all dressed in matching navy suits. Their eyes flicked toward him, scanning from his worn boots to his old leather jacket, then back to their screens. Not a single greeting, not even a polite nod. One young salesman standing nearby glanced up from his phone, gave a quick dismissive look, and then muttered something under his breath before pretending to scroll again. Keanu moved quietly between the rows of gleaming cars. He had walked into showrooms before, but something about this one felt different. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was judgmental. He could feel the invisible barrier between himself and the world these people lived in. His reflection followed him in the polished paint of the luxury sedans, a man dressed simply among machines that symbolized excess. Still, he stayed composed, his expression calm, his voice steady when he finally spoke. "Excuse me," he said softly to the young salesman. "Could you tell me more about that car in the back? The 1969 Mustang?" The man looked up, his tone dripping with disinterest. "Someone will be with you in a moment," he said quickly, tapping his phone screen before walking off toward the opposite end of the room. Keanu watched him go, his jaw tightening just slightly. The lack of basic courtesy stung, not because of pride, but because it reflected something deeper, a lack of humanity. He turned his gaze back toward the Mustang. It sat under a spotlight, its deep gray body glimmering like liquid steel. There was a beauty in its imperfection, a quiet dignity in its old design. Unlike the sterile perfection of the cars around it, this one carried history. Keanu stepped closer, drawn by the craftsmanship, by the faint reflection of another time. He could picture Jake behind the wheel, laughing, shifting gears on some forgotten desert road. The sound of his voice echoed faintly in Keanu's mind, a ghost of friendship that never quite faded. He reached out and brushed his fingertips along the side mirror. The cool metal met his skin like a reminder that time passes, but meaning remains. He had come here with purpose, yet already he could feel the hostility thickening in the air behind him. Behind him, the quiet murmur of conversation began to stir again. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. A few employees near the counter leaned toward one another, whispering in tones they believed were subtle. Their words carried, slicing through the stillness. "Who let that guy in here?" one of them muttered. "Probably lost," another said, chuckling softly. "You can tell he's not buying anything." Keanu heard them. He didn't flinch. Instead, he let his hand rest gently on the car's hood, focusing on the smooth texture beneath his fingers. The whispers didn't bother him as much as what they revealed a truth he'd seen too many times before. People judging worth by appearance. The irony, he thought, was that the very things they valued, status, presentation, wealth, were the things that often blinded them from real character. He turned slightly, scanning the room for a salesperson. Near the far end of the showroom, a group of 3 stood together, all in pressed suits and polished shoes. They noticed him looking and quickly averted their gaze, one of them nudging the other to take a call that didn't exist. Keanu's patience was steady, but inside, something began to tighten. He wasn't angry, not yet just quietly disappointed. He walked toward the main counter, where an older salesman sat behind a computer. "Hi," Keanu said in his usual calm tone. "I'm interested in the 1969 Mustang you have on display. Do you know its history?" The man didn't even glance up. His fingers tapped lazily against the keyboard. "Someone will assist you shortly," he replied, his voice flat, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "Thank you," Keanu said, forcing a small smile before stepping back. He turned again toward the car, letting the silence swallow him. The tension in the room was growing heavier now, an unspoken consensus that he didn't belong. Still, he refused to let it change who he was. He walked around the Mustang, admiring its lines, tracing every detail of its design. The chrome bumpers glinted in the light, the leather interior worn but elegant. It wasn't just a machine, it was a memory waiting to be reborn. As he crouched slightly to look at the wheel rims, he caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection, a few employees watching from across the room. One of them snickered, shaking his head. "Guy's acting like he can buy it," he whispered. Keanu straightened slowly, his eyes calm but unreadable. He didn't confront them. Instead, he exhaled through his nose, a subtle release of tension. He'd learned long ago that silence could be louder than words. He stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, absorbing the atmosphere, the cold marble, the hollow laughter, the quiet arrogance that filled the air. In that moment, he realized something. It wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about dignity. Minutes passed, though they felt longer inside that silent, gleaming space. Keanu stayed near the Mustang, his expression neutral, though a quiet storm began to stir beneath the calm surface. He had always believed in patience, in letting people reveal who they truly were through how they treated others. What he was seeing now was a reflection of something uglier than simple indifference. It was contempt disguised as sophistication. A man in his 30s finally approached him, a salesman wearing a crisp white shirt and a watch that shimmered every time he moved. His smile was thin, his tone rehearsed. "Sir, can I help you with something?" "Yes," Keanu said softly. "I was asking about this car, the 1969 Mustang." The salesman's gaze flicked over him quickly, taking in the faded jeans, the scuffed boots, the well-worn jacket. The smile faltered, replaced by the kind of look one gives to a mistake that needs correcting. "Ah," the man said, his voice suddenly less polite. "That one's not really for everyone. It's one of our rare collector's pieces." Keanu met his eyes evenly. "That's exactly why I'm interested." The salesman hesitated, almost thrown by how calmly he answered. "Of course," he replied with a forced chuckle. "Well, it's a very special car, a bit out of the usual price range. Most clients who inquire about it, well, they tend to schedule private appointments." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication was clear. Keanu smiled faintly, nodding once. "I understand," he said. "I just wanted to know more about its history. I'll have to get the manager for that," the man replied quickly, already turning away before Keanu could respond. One moment, Keanu watched him go, his shoulders relaxing into stillness again. He didn't chase after the man or demand respect. Instead, he turned his attention back to the Mustang. Its metallic surface reflected the light above, and, faintly, his own face serene, thoughtful, and quietly wounded. He thought of Jake again, of how his friend used to remind him that the real test of character came when nobody important was watching. The irony wasn't lost on him. Around him stood people who valued only appearance, unable to see what was right in front of them. Through the glass wall, sunlight streamed in, breaking across the polished floor like shards of gold. The contrast between the warmth outside and the cold indifference within made the moment feel almost symbolic. Keanu stepped back from the car, sliding his hands into his pockets. He told himself to be patient. He hadn't come here to prove anything. He had come with hope to find something meaningful, to do something good. But as he waited, listening to the faint snickers from the corner of the room and the clicking of expensive shoes on marble, he couldn't help feeling that something inevitable was approaching. The kind of moment that tests not wealth or fame, but humanity itself. The soft clicking of polished shoes echoed across the marble floor, cutting through the uneasy silence. The employees straightened almost instantly, their postures tightening as if a quiet signal had passed through the room. From the glass office at the far end of the showroom, a tall man emerged. His name was Richard Cole, the dealership's general manager. Everything about him announced authority. The sharp cut of his charcoal suit, the glint of his cufflinks, the confident rhythm of his stride. He was the kind of man who thrived on control, on being the center of every conversation. As he approached, the employees' whispers faded. All eyes turned discreetly toward him, and the stranger in the leather jacket standing by the Mustang. Richard's gaze followed theirs. His smile was smooth, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile that measured before it welcomed. He stopped a few paces from Keanu, his arms crossed loosely, his voice low but laced with arrogance. "Good morning," he said, the words practiced, professional. "I hear you're interested in the Mustang." Keanu nodded slightly. "Yes, it's a beautiful piece of craftsmanship. I was just asking about its history." Richard tilted his head, studying him in silence for a moment. His eyes traveled deliberately from Keanu's boots to his jacket, then lingered on his face as if trying to place him. "That model," Richard began slowly, "is quite exclusive. Not the kind of thing you see every day. In fact, most people never even get the chance to sit in one, let alone own it." "I can imagine," Keanu replied calmly. "You don't see work like this often anymore." Richard's smile thinned. "True," he said, stepping closer, lowering his voice slightly. "But cars like that aren't for everyone." The words hung in the air between them, polite on the surface, but pointed underneath. Keanu met his gaze without blinking. I suppose that depends on how you define everyone. For a brief moment, the mask of confidence on Richard's face faltered. He hadn't expected pushback, certainly not delivered with such quiet composure. His jaw tightened, but he quickly recovered, forcing another smile. Fair enough, he said. It's just that models like this tend to attract a certain kind of clientele. You understand, I'm sure. Keanu said nothing. He simply studied the Mustang again, letting the silence answer for him. Around them, a few employees lingered, pretending to tidy brochures or check schedules, but their ears were tuned to every word. The air in the room began to change, a subtle current of tension running beneath the polished surface. Richard shifted his stance, sensing he hadn't quite established dominance. His next words came slower, colder, like someone testing the limits of civility. You know, he said, most people who inquire about this car come prepared. They usually know what they're getting into. It's not a casual purchase. Keanu turned his eyes back toward him, his tone still gentle, but edged with quiet firmness. I didn't realize curiosity required a price tag. Richard's smirk faltered for half a heartbeat, then returned sharper, colder. Curiosity's fine, he said. His voice dipped in condescension. But around here, people usually come with intent. This isn't a museum, it's a place for serious buyers. He took another step closer, his cologne thick in the air, the shine of his shoes reflecting the showroom lights. Keanu remained motionless. Intent can start with interest, he said evenly. I like understanding what I might invest in. Richard chuckled under his breath, the sound dry, dismissive. Invest. That's a strong word for someone who walked in here looking like that. His eyes traced Keanu's jacket and boots again, lingering just long enough to make his meaning clear. Let me guess you're a collector, right? Or maybe just curious about what luxury feels like up close. A few employees nearby laughed quietly, the sound muffled but unmistakable. Keanu didn't look their way. His expression stayed calm, his voice soft but resolute. You'd be surprised what kind of people appreciate things with history. Richard tilted his head, feigning amusement. Oh, I have no doubt. But people who appreciate them, he said, lowering his tone, usually can afford them. The words cut through the space like glass breaking. The room fell silent. Even the faint jazz music seemed to fade into the background. Keanu's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't raise his voice, didn't react with anger. Instead, he looked straight into Richard's eyes, his calmness almost unsettling. It's interesting, he said quietly. You talk about value, yet you can't recognize it standing right in front of you. For a moment, Richard's confidence cracked. Something in Keanu's voice, the controlled power, the depth of it hit him like a quiet challenge. But arrogance was his armor. He forced a laugh. Listen, he said, spreading his hands, pretending to soften. Don't take it personally. I just have to make sure people understand what they're dealing with. This isn't your average vehicle. It's 6 figures cash, not credit. You get my point? Keanu nodded slowly. I get it, he said. You think people's worth depends on what they wear or how much they can spend. Richard scoffed, pretending to brush it off. But the remark struck deeper than he wanted to admit. No, he said. I think worth is shown in what people achieve, in what they can prove. The employees' attention had now fully turned toward them. Phones were discreetly lifted, pretending to check messages, but cameras were quietly recording. Everyone could sense that the air was shifting. The polite exchange had become something else. Keanu's tone stayed gentle, yet each word landed with quiet precision. Then maybe you should rethink what you're proving right now. Richard blinked. The challenge was unmistakable, but delivered without heat. That made it worse. He felt control slipping away, and he hated it. He forced a cold smile and gestured toward the exit. Look, he said, maybe this place isn't what you're looking for. We cater to a certain crowd, people who know what they're doing. I'm sure there's a used lot down the street that might be more your style. Keanu didn't move. He stood quietly beside the Mustang, his reflection rippling faintly on its polished surface. For a moment, his silence seemed to unsettle everyone in the room more than any argument could. Then he finally spoke, his tone steady and clear. "You assume a lot about people you don't know." Richard let out a short laugh, trying to disguise the nervousness creeping into his voice. "I don't assume," he said. "I've been in this business long enough to know who's serious and who's wasting time. People like you walk in every week, talk big, take pictures, then disappear when it's time to pay." Keanu turned his gaze toward him, unshaken. "You see, that's the problem," he said softly. "You've built your world around what you think people are worth, and you stopped seeing who they really are." The manager's smirk faded, but pride pushed him to answer. "That's easy to say when you don't have to earn it." Keanu took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them. His eyes were calm, but there was something in them that made Richard's breath hitch a quiet strength, an unspoken authority that didn't come from wealth, but from truth. "Respect isn't earned by a price tag," Keanu said. "It's given because it's right." The entire showroom fell still. Employees who had been pretending to type or polish cars now stood frozen. Even the sound of the air conditioner seemed to vanish. For a long second, Richard didn't respond. He just stared, caught between anger and embarrassment. Finally, he exhaled sharply, his voice dropping. "You talk like a philosopher, but this isn't a classroom. This is business. And in business, there are winners and there are dreamers. You don't look like a winner to me." The words hit the air like a slap. One of the employees near the back winced, sensing that the line had crossed from arrogance into cruelty. Keanu's expression didn't change. He didn't raise his voice or take a step back. He simply gave a faint, almost weary smile. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "But I'd rather be a dreamer who respects people than a winner who's forgotten how." The silence that followed was absolute. The employees looked away, pretending not to witness the humiliation of their superior. Richard stood frozen, his confidence faltering for the first time. Somewhere, a phone camera captured the final moment, Keanu turning back toward the Mustang, the light glinting off its hood as the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The uneasy stillness in the showroom broke when one of the wealthy clients nearby let out a quiet scoff. The sound was small but sharp, like a spark catching dry wood. Within seconds, the tension in the air thickened. Richard noticed the reaction and, sensing eyes on him, straightened his posture. He wanted control. Again, wanted to look powerful. He turned toward the other customers, smiling thinly as if to reassure them that everything was under control. Then he looked back at Keanu, his voice smooth but cutting. "You know," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "we get all kinds of people walking in here. Some just come to browse, take pictures, live a little dream before heading back to reality." A few polite laughs rippled across the room. Keanu didn't move. His calm expression didn't change, but the weight in his eyes did. There was no anger, just quiet sadness. He had faced far worse in his life, but moments like this still reminded him how far people could fall when they measured others by appearance alone. Richard noticed that lack of reaction and mistook it for weakness. He stepped closer, his voice growing more performative. "I mean, look at you," he said, gesturing toward Keanu's clothes. "Worn-out boots, that jacket, what is that, vintage? I'll admit, it's a bold choice for a place like this." Some of the employees shifted uncomfortably. They weren't laughing now, but Richard didn't stop. He thrived on dominance, and every second of silence felt like permission to push further. Keanu looked at him steadily, his voice barely above a whisper, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't realize respect had a dress code." The line hit the air like a slow echo, landing softly yet with unmistakable force. A few heads turned. Someone in the back smirked, and the laughter died instantly. The words carried a truth that unsettled the room. Richard's smile froze for a moment, but he quickly tried to recover with a sneer. "That's clever," he said, stepping closer again. "But this isn't about respect. It's about reality. And the reality is, people who look like you don't usually walk out of here with anything but disappointment." Keanu didn't answer. He simply stood his ground, his silence making Richard's arrogance sound even louder. The calm in his eyes wasn't defiance, it was restraint. A strength Richard couldn't recognize because it wasn't the kind that came from money or power. The room grew quieter still, the soft hum of the air conditioner the only sound left. Even the customers who had laughed earlier were now uneasy. They could feel it, the moment was shifting. Something about this stranger's presence demanded respect, even when none was being offered. Richard folded his arms, his smirk sharpening as if he'd won an invisible battle. "Tell you what," he said, his tone mocking. "Why don't you tell me what kind of car you're looking for? Maybe something more practical? We have a few pre-owned sedans in the back. Something that might fit your, let's say, style." A few customers glanced at each other, some whispering under their breath. One woman frowned, shaking her head slightly, as if even she found the scene distasteful. But Richard wasn't paying attention to them. He was focused entirely on humiliating the man in front of him. Keanu took a slow breath, keeping his composure. He could feel the heat of judgment radiating from every corner of the room, yet his face remained calm. "I was interested in the Mustang," he said quietly, "because it reminded me of someone I once knew." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Someone you knew?" he repeated, feigning curiosity. "What, did they used to drive one like this?" Keanu nodded. "A friend. Someone who taught me what real value looks like. He said a car is only as meaningful as the hands that restore it." For a brief moment, Richard's expression wavered, but then the arrogance returned. "Touching," he said sarcastically. "But cars like this aren't for sentimental stories. They're for collectors, people who understand real luxury, not nostalgia." Keanu's lips curved slightly in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You think luxury means what people see. I think it's about what something represents." That quiet reply landed harder than anything else so far. A man standing near the counter muttered, "He's right," under his breath. Richard heard it. His jaw tightened, anger flashing briefly behind his eyes. His authority, his control of the room, was slipping. He stepped closer, the echo of his shoes sharp against the marble. "Look," he said, his tone turning sharper. "You can talk philosophy all you want, but that doesn't change the fact that this car costs more than some people's houses. I doubt you could even get approved for financing." Keanu's gaze didn't waver. "You seem very sure of yourself," he said softly. "Does judging people help you sell more cars?" The question stopped Richard cold. For a second, his face hardened, the pretense of charm slipping away. His voice lowered into something colder, angrier. "What helps me," he said, "is keeping people like you from wasting my time." That sentence cracked the room wide open. A few gasps broke out quietly. Employees shifted nervously. The tension was no longer hidden. It was visible, heavy, electric. Keanu stood still. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. When he finally spoke, his words were steady as stone. "The only thing you're wasting right now," he said, "is a chance to act like a decent human being." The words hung in the air, soft yet heavy, like a weight no one wanted to touch. The silence stretched too long, and even the faint hum of the showroom lights seemed to fade beneath it. Richard's face twitched, part shock, part fury. He had never been spoken to that way inside his own dealership. His pride burned hotter than his reason. He took a step forward, closing the distance until he was standing almost chest to chest with Keanu. The sharp scent of his cologne filled the narrow space between them. "You think you can walk in here," Richard said, his voice rising, "and talk down to me in front of my staff?" Keanu's tone didn't change. "I'm not talking down to you," he replied. "I'm asking you to remember what respect looks like." That calmness only fueled Richard's anger. He gave a short, bitter laugh that carried across the room. "Respect?" he said. "You earn that with success, not with words. Look around you. Everyone here worked to be where they are." You gestured to Keanu's boots and jacket with open disdain. "You don't even look like you belong." A murmur moved through the onlookers. Some of the clients shifted uncomfortably. Others watched with growing disbelief. The arrogance had gone from subtle to cruel. Keanu's jaw tightened slightly. but his expression stayed composed. "You don't need to look like you belong to treat people with dignity," he said softly. Richard's voice hardened further. "You don't get it," he snapped. "This place is for winners, for people who make something of themselves, not for dreamers playing dress-up, hoping for attention." The insult cut deep, but Keanu didn't respond with anger. Instead, he simply looked at Richard, his gaze level and unshaken. When he finally spoke, his words were slow and deliberate. "It's strange," he said. "You talk about winners, but I've never met a winner who needed to tear others down to feel taller." That sentence hit like a sudden gust of wind. The employees went still, glancing at one another. One young man near the desk whispered, "He's right," barely audible over the quiet. Richard's composure cracked. His face flushed, and he took another step forward, his tone losing all pretense of professionalism. "You don't know who you're talking to," he hissed. "People like you don't last 5 minutes in a place like this. You're nobody." The word echoed sharply through the showroom. Nobody. It hit the air and stayed there, raw and heavy. Keanu didn't answer. He simply met Richard's glare, with a silence that said everything. There was disappointment in his eyes, but not defeat. Around them, the wealthy clients who once smirked were now quiet, uncertain. The man they had dismissed as ordinary had become the only person in the room who looked truly composed. He adjusted his jacket slightly, took a step back, and turned his gaze toward the car once more. The tension didn't break, it deepened. Everyone could sense it now. Something bigger was coming, something that would expose every arrogance laid bare in that glittering showroom. For a long moment, no one moved. The air inside the dealership felt thick, almost electric. Richard stood rigid, breathing heavily, the veins in his neck tightening as his anger flared. Keanu remained still, his calm expression only deepening the manager's frustration. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then Richard suddenly stepped forward, the heel of his shoes clicking sharply against the marble. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" he said, his voice trembling with rage. "You stand there, acting superior, pretending to be calm, like you're teaching me some kind of lesson." Keanu shook his head slowly. "No," he said softly. "I'm not pretending anything. I'm just standing here." The measured tone hit Richard like a slap. He couldn't stand it. The quietness, the composure, the way this man's stillness exposed his own insecurity. His face twisted, and without warning, he shoved Keanu backward. The force made Keanu take a step back, but not lose balance. Gasps rippled through the room. "Sir, please," one of the younger employees began, but Richard's glare silenced him instantly. Keanu straightened, brushing the front of his jacket lightly. "There's still time to stop this," he said, his voice steady. But Richard was too far gone. "Don't you tell me what to do," he snapped, his anger spiraling out of control. Then, in one reckless motion, he raised his fist and swung. The moment slowed. Keanu's instincts took over, refined by years of training, discipline, and self-control. With fluid precision, he caught Richard's wrist midair. The impact never came. His grip was firm, but not violent, steady enough to stop the strike without causing harm. The sound of the contact, a soft, controlled clap, echoed louder than the swing itself. The room froze. Every employee, every client, even the ones pretending not to look, stopped breathing for a second. The sight was surreal. Keanu Reeves, holding back a furious man's fist with effortless calm, his eyes fixed on him not in anger, but in quiet disappointment. Richard's face went pale. The strength he had assumed would intimidate was gone, absorbed completely by the composure in front of him. His arm trembled against Keanu's restraint. "Violence doesn't prove power," Keanu said quietly. "It reveals weakness." The words landed softly, but they struck with the weight of truth. They didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded lived. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The hum of the showroom lights, the faint music playing somewhere in the background, it all faded into silence. Every person in that room could feel it. Something real, something bigger than pride, had just entered the space. Richard's breathing quickened, his face red with a mix of shock and humiliation. His arm stayed locked in Keanu's grasp, trembling under the pressure of his own rage. The sheer stillness of the moment made it unbearable for him. Every eye in the room was on them, his staff, the clients, even a teenager near the back who had quietly lifted his phone, recording the unfolding scene. Keanu looked straight into Richard's eyes, his voice calm but steady. "This isn't how you lead," he said softly. "This is how you lose yourself." The words seemed to echo in Richard's head, and for a brief instant, the fury flickering inside him faltered. He blinked, caught between shame and pride. But then his ego clawed its way back. "Let me go," he hissed through clenched teeth. Keanu released his arm immediately. The manager stumbled a half-step backward, the sudden freedom throwing off his balance. He steadied himself, brushing his suit jacket as though to erase the embarrassment, but nothing could hide it now. The damage was done. Everyone had seen it. The room stayed silent. Even the air felt heavy, thick with the weight of realization. Richard glanced around the room and saw the stares, the shock, the judgment, the quiet disgust. He tried to speak, but his throat tightened. "You," he began, pointing a trembling finger. "You provoked me. You came in here trying to make me look bad." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "I didn't have to," he said. "You did that yourself." A low murmur rippled across the floor. The truth in his voice was undeniable. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. Keanu straightened his jacket and stepped back, his movements deliberate, controlled. "I came here looking for a car," he continued, "but I think I found a lesson instead." Richard's mouth opened to retort, but no words came. His authority had evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of exposure. He turned toward the employees as if expecting someone to back him up, but they all avoided his gaze. Some lowered their heads, others looked toward Keanu, almost in quiet respect. Keanu exhaled softly, the kind of breath that comes after a storm. His voice dropped even lower, but the silence made every word ring clear. "No one's watching the cars anymore," he said. "They're watching you, and they'll remember this moment a lot longer than any sale you've ever made." The truth hung in the air, heavy and final. Richard stood frozen, his fists unclenched now, his anger collapsing under the weight of his own humiliation. Keanu turned slightly, ready to leave, but paused one last time. He met Richard's eyes and said quietly, "The hardest lesson in life is learning that respect can't be bought." The line lingered like a whisper that refused to fade. Keanu took a slow step back, the tension still hanging in the air like static before a storm. His calm presence filled the silence more completely than any outburst could have. Richard, still trembling, stood in the center of the showroom, surrounded by the evidence of his downfall. The same employees who once obeyed him without question now looked anywhere but at him. The illusion of control had shattered completely. One of the clients near the counter whispered to another, "That's Keanu Reeves, isn't it?" The words spread like a quiet current through the room. Heads turned. Recognition dawned slowly, almost unbelieving. The man they had just watched being shoved, insulted, and nearly hit wasn't just any customer. He was one of the most respected figures in Hollywood, known not only for his films, but for his humility. The silence that followed was thick with shame. Even those who had laughed earlier now stared at the floor, wishing they could take it back. The young customer holding his phone lowered it slightly, his hands shaking, unsure whether to stop recording or keep going. He looked at Keanu, then at the furious manager, and chose to keep filming. Somewhere deep down, he knew this was history in motion. Keanu didn't move for several seconds. He stood there, composed and silent, his gaze steady on the man who had tried to strike him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried not anger but an almost painful calm. "You can fix a car that's been wrecked," he said quietly, "but it's much harder to fix a person who's lost their sense of decency." The words hit harder than any punch ever could. The employees stared, frozen in place. Richard's throat tightened, but he couldn't respond. The fight had drained out of him. He wasn't angry anymore, he was terrified of what he'd just done, and who he'd done it to. Keanu adjusted his jacket and turned toward the door. His movements were slow, deliberate, and heavy with meaning. Every step echoed across the glossy floor. When he reached the glass entrance, he stopped and looked back over his shoulder. His voice, soft but unwavering, carried through the entire room. "Respect costs nothing," he said, "but it's worth more than anything you sell here." No one dared to speak. The words lingered in the still air like a warning and a blessing all at once. Keanu pushed open the door, stepping out into the sunlight. The light hit his face, bright and unfiltered, as if the world outside was cleaner than the one he had left behind. Behind him, no one moved. Even the sound of the door closing felt final. The young man by the counter lowered his phone, heart pounding. He looked at the screen. He had captured the whole thing, from the first insult to that last line. He didn't know what he would do with it yet, but something told him this video wasn't going to stay quiet for long. The next morning, Los Angeles woke to a storm that didn't come from the sky, it came from the internet. Overnight, the video recorded inside the dealership had spread like wildfire. It began on a small social media page where the young man who filmed it uploaded the footage with a simple caption, "Humility versus arrogance. Watch how this man handled being disrespected." Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times, then tens of thousands. By sunrise, it was everywhere. The video was grainy, taken from a corner of the showroom, but what it captured was unmistakable. A man in worn jeans and a leather jacket standing calmly, while a furious dealership manager screamed in his face. The moment of the shove, the failed punch, the quiet restraint, all of it played out in seconds, yet left a lasting impact. The part that truly captivated viewers came when the man stopped the blow mid-air and said, "Violence doesn't prove power. It reveals weakness." That line spread across social media faster than the clip itself. People quoted it, posted it on images, and wrote it over black backgrounds in bold white letters. At first, viewers didn't even realize who the man was. Some called him the mystery gentleman. Others described him as a humble stranger who taught a lesson to arrogance. The mystery only added fuel to the fire. Then, a few keen-eyed users noticed the familiar face beneath the grainy lighting. Someone zoomed in, took a screenshot, and posted side-by-side photos comparing the man in the video with Keanu Reeves. The resemblance was undeniable. Within minutes, confirmation followed from witnesses who had been there. The internet erupted. News outlets picked up the story almost immediately. One headline read, "Manager attacks customer, turns out it was Keanu Reeves." Another wrote, "Humility in action, Keanu stops punch. Teaches, lesson without violence." Morning shows replayed the clip on loop, breaking it down frame by frame. Commentators praised his restraint, calling it the perfect example of strength through calm. Online, people couldn't stop talking. Comment sections filled with admiration and disbelief. "He didn't even raise his voice," one wrote. "That manager had no idea who he was talking to." Another said, "Keanu just proved again why he's the most humble man in Hollywood." The footage had become more than entertainment. It was a reflection of something deeper. It wasn't just about a fight or a celebrity moment. It was about how the world treated kindness as weakness until it was forced to see it for what it truly was, power. By mid-morning, the video had crossed 1 million views. By noon, it was everywhere: news sites, Twitter threads, talk shows, and even late-night headlines. The clip had been reposted so many times that every angle of it seemed burned into people's minds. The simplicity of it was what made it powerful. No background music, no fancy editing, just a quiet man choosing dignity over violence. Television anchors dissected every second of it. One show played it in slow motion, freezing the exact frame where Keanu stopped the punch mid-air. "Look at his face," one commentator said. "He doesn't look angry. He looks disappointed." The other nodded. "That's what makes it remarkable. He doesn't retaliate. He teaches." The internet loved it. Hashtags like #respect costs nothing and #be like Keanu began trending worldwide. Fans flooded social media with praise, calling him a symbol of humility in an age obsessed with ego. One user wrote, "The way he stayed calm is what real strength looks like." Another said, "He could have ruined that guy's life in one move, but he chose grace instead." Then came the outrage. When viewers realized how badly the dealership manager had treated him, people demanded accountability. Threads erupted, naming the dealership, tagging luxury brands associated with it, and calling for boycotts. Comments piled up by the thousands. "Fire that manager immediately. How could anyone treat another human being like that?" He didn't just insult Keanu, he insulted decency itself. News agencies rushed to confirm the story. Reporters camped outside the dealership, cameras flashing as employees hurried past in silence. The manager, Richard Cole, refused interviews. His phone was flooded with calls, and his social media accounts vanished overnight. Every statement he released through the company only seemed to make things worse. Meanwhile, Keanu stayed silent. He didn't post, didn't tweet, didn't respond to any of the media frenzy. The world spoke for him. Articles praised his restraint as a masterclass in humanity. Even other celebrities joined in, posting their own messages of admiration. One actor wrote, "Only Keanu could stop a punch and start a movement." What had begun as a moment of arrogance in a single dealership was now a global conversation about class, respect, and humility. Millions saw in that short clip something they rarely found in their daily lives: proof that kindness could be stronger than cruelty, and that grace under pressure could change the world faster than anger ever could. By evening, the clip had reached every corner of the world. News networks replayed it alongside commentary about modern arrogance and humility. Online magazines published features with headlines like, "The Day Keanu Taught the World a Lesson in Grace." Even people who didn't normally follow celebrity news found themselves drawn to the story, not because of fame, but because of the humanity behind it. Clips of Keanu's past acts of kindness began resurfacing photos of him giving up his subway seat, waiting in line like everyone else, and talking gently with fans. The viral video became proof of what people had always said about him, that he was different, genuine, in a world that often rewarded vanity. Every news anchor echoed the same message. In an industry full of ego, Keanu Reeves continues to show what true character looks like. Comment sections became emotional battlegrounds. Thousands of strangers wrote about their own experiences with judgment and prejudice. "I was once turned away from a store because I looked poor," one person shared. Another said, "This video gave me hope. There are still good people out there who don't need to shout to be heard." Each story built upon the last, turning what had started as outrage into something bigger, a global reflection on dignity. The dealership's social media pages were flooded with negative reviews. Their 5-star rating plummeted overnight. People posted screenshots of the manager's behavior, labeling it a symbol of elitism. The company tried to delete comments, but they multiplied faster than they could keep up. Under every photo, the same phrase appeared again and again: "Respect costs nothing." In the middle of the chaos, a reporter managed to reach the young man who had filmed the video. His name was Tyler, a college student who had just been in the showroom that day to take photos of luxury cars for a school project. When asked why he decided to post the video, his answer was simple: "Because what I saw wasn't just wrong, it was important. People needed to see how someone could face hate with calm instead of anger." By midnight, the clip had passed 50 million views. Talk shows were already lining up interviews, psychologists were analyzing Keanu's reaction, and brands were quoting his words in marketing campaigns. But for most viewers, it wasn't about fame. It was about rediscovering something they had forgotten. In a noisy, divided world, one man's quiet restraint had reminded millions that decency still mattered. And as the video continued to spread across every screen, the final image lingered in people's minds. Keanu walking out into the sunlight, leaving behind arrogance and carrying, with him, the unshakable strength of humility. The following morning, the once quiet parking lot of Cole & Whitman Automotive turned into a media circus. Reporters lined the entrance, cameras flashing, microphones extended toward every employee who dared to show their face. Satellite vans crowded the sidewalks. The dealership, once proud of its pristine image, was now a symbol of public disgrace. Inside, the staff huddled together, whispering nervously. The air that used to smell of polished leather and expensive cologne now carried the sharp tang of fear. Every ring of the phone made them flinch. The company's official website had crashed overnight from the flood of angry messages. Their social media accounts were buried under hundreds of thousands of comments, each one angrier than the last. "Boycott Cole and Whitman," one post read. "No respect, no business." Another said, "That manager doesn't deserve to represent any brand, let alone luxury." Within hours, a petition calling for Richard Cole's resignation had reached over 1 million signatures. Richard himself sat in his office with the blinds drawn, the glow of his phone screen reflecting off his face. He scrolled through the articles, each headline worse than the last. Arrogance on display. Manager attacks Keanu Reeves. The day class collided with character. His name was everywhere. His face, frozen mid-shout in a still from the viral video, had become an international meme. He slammed his phone onto the desk and buried his head in his hands. Every PR consultant he'd spoken to had told him the same thing. He needed to make a statement immediately. Reluctantly, he opened his laptop and began typing. Minutes later, the dealership's official page posted a statement. "We deeply regret the misunderstanding that occurred. Our manager, Mr. Richard Cole, did not recognize Mr. Reeves and acted inappropriately. We extend our sincerest apologies to Mr. Reeves and to the public." The reaction was instant and brutal. Comments flooded in faster than the moderators could delete them. "You didn't need to recognize him to treat him like a human being," one wrote. "So it's only wrong because he's famous?" another added. The apology that was meant to save the dealership only made things worse. People weren't angry because Keanu Reeves had been insulted. They were angry because anyone could have been. The video had struck a nerve, exposing the quiet cruelty of judging others by appearance, and no amount of corporate language could wash away the stain of that truth. Outside, a reporter's voice cut through the noise. "Do you have a comment, Mr. Cole? Did you really try to punch Keanu Reeves?" Richard didn't answer. He just pulled the blinds tighter and turned off his phone, but the world outside was already far too loud to ignore. By midday, the story had spiraled far beyond the dealership's control. Major news outlets ran continuous coverage, and every few hours, new details surfaced. Former employees began speaking out anonymously to journalists, each with a story that painted the same picture, an environment poisoned by arrogance and fear. One woman, who had worked at the dealership for 5 years, described Richard's management style as humiliation disguised as leadership. Another said, "He treated staff like furniture, useful until they made a mistake, then disposable." Each new testimony fanned the flames. Articles now labeled the dealership as a toxic workplace, and former customers chimed in with complaints of their own. "He looked down on me when I came in wearing work clothes," one comment read. "I bought my car somewhere else, and I'm glad I did." Inside the building, panic grew. Employees whispered about quitting before the company collapsed entirely. 2 salesmen handed in their resignations before noon. The receptionist cried quietly at her desk, scrolling through hateful comments directed at the cried. Dealership's official page. Meanwhile, the media parked outside like vultures. A row of cameras faced the entrance, ready for a single quote. Every time a door opened, reporters shouted questions. "Will the dealership fire the manager? Has Keanu responded? Do you plan to close down?" No one answered. When Richard finally stepped out of his office to address his team, the room went silent. He looked exhausted, his once flawless suit wrinkled, his tie loosened. "Listen," he began, voice shaky but trying to sound firm. "This is getting out of hand. We need to handle this professionally. I made a mistake, but we can fix it." No one spoke. He looked around the room, searching for agreement, but found only downcast eyes. The respect he once commanded through fear was gone. The power he had clung to was slipping away faster than he could grasp it. "Public opinion fades," he said after a pause. "We'll wait it out." But even he didn't believe it. Outside, a drone camera hovered over the lot, filming the building for yet another segment. The dealership's phone lines were jammed, not with buyers, but with angry callers demanding answers. The luxury brands they represented began contacting corporate headquarters, expressing concern over brand image. By late afternoon, every car inside the showroom sat untouched, collecting dust beneath the fluorescent lights. The customers who once came to admire the vehicles now crossed the street to avoid being seen near the scandal. The gleaming glass walls that once symbolized exclusivity now reflected nothing but shame. While chaos consumed the dealership, Keanu Reeves stayed completely silent. He ignored the interview requests, the trending hashtags, and the reporters waiting outside his home. He didn't need to speak. The world was already speaking for him. Instead, he spent the day in quiet reflection, walking through Griffith Park, far from the flashing lights of cameras. Friends who called to check on him said he sounded calm. "I'm fine," he told one of them. "I just don't want this to become about revenge. That's not the point." His words reflected the same grace that had made the video powerful in the first place. While others saw a scandal, he saw an opportunity for people to remember something deeper: how easy it was to lose compassion in a world obsessed with appearances. By nightfall, the dealership's logo was trending for all the wrong reasons. Its partners began to pull contracts, and even its official social media pages were shut down. Richard Cole was suspended pending internal review, though everyone knew what that meant. Somewhere in a quiet apartment miles away, Keanu watched the sun set behind the hills, the sky fading into gold and violet. He didn't smile, but there was peace in his eyes. The world was roaring outside, but inside Keanu Reeves' modest Los Angeles home, there was only silence. The faint hum of his old refrigerator was the loudest sound in the room. He sat on the edge of his couch, a cup of untouched tea resting beside him, as the viral video played across his television screen. He watched it once, from start to finish. Every detail replayed before him: the shove, the raised fist, the moment he stopped the punch. But what struck him most wasn't the violence. It was the look on Richard's face right before it happened. The frustration, the fear, the emptiness that came from someone who had forgotten how to see people as people. When the clip ended, Keanu turned off the television and sat still for a long time. The light from the screen faded, leaving his reflection in the dark glass. He looked tired, but not bitter. He had seen arrogance before. Hollywood was full of it. But something about this felt heavier, as if the incident wasn't just about one man. It was a mirror, showing the world what it had become. He rose quietly and walked over to his desk. A worn leather journal lay open, half filled with thoughts and sketches. He picked up a pen and began to write. Status fades. Value doesn't. Respect isn't given to appearances, it's proven by how we treat people. He paused, tapping the pen gently against the page. His thoughts drifted to Jake Lawson, the friend he'd once called a brother. Jake had been his stunt double and closest confidant, a man who'd risked everything for him on set. But fame had come fast back then, and pride had come quietly with it. They'd argued once over something small, something stupid, and for years, neither of them spoke. When Keanu finally reached out to make peace, it was too late. Jake was gone. He still carried that guilt like an invisible scar, and now, watching the world tear apart another man for his mistake, Keanu felt that familiar ache return. He didn't want this to end in destruction. He wanted it to mean something. Keanu set the pen down and leaned back in his chair, staring at the page for a moment before closing the journal. The night outside was quiet, but his thoughts weren't. The flickering streetlights outside his window cast long shadows across the room, and for a while, he simply listened to the faint hum of the city, to the sound of his own breathing, to the silence that always came after something loud. He reached for his phone, scrolling through dozens of missed calls and unread messages. Journalists, studio reps, talk show invitations. Everyone wanted a statement. But there was one name that caught his eye. Someone who wouldn't want a, quote, only a conversation. It was his old friend, Marcus Hale, a musician he'd known since his early acting days. Keanu called him. The phone rang twice before Marcus answered, his voice filled with concern. "Man, are you okay? The whole world's losing its mind over that video." "I'm fine," Keanu said quietly. I just don't want this to become another scandal. That's not the point, Marcus sighed. People need stories, Keanu. They'll turn it into whatever keeps them talking. I know, Keanu replied. But I don't want anger to be the story. That man in the video, Richard, he's already destroyed himself. I don't want to help the world destroy him more. There was a pause. So what are you going to do? Keanu looked out the window, his reflection layered over the lights of the city below. I think I'm going to go back there, he said. Not to prove anything, just to close it the right way. Marcus was silent for a moment, then said softly, Only you would think like that. Keanu smiled faintly. Maybe, but I've learned that if you walk away from something unfinished, it never really leaves you. He ended the call and sat there for a while longer, lost in thought. Outside, the night wind rustled through the trees. The dag. Chaos online felt distant here. Just noise. But inside him, a quiet decision had taken root. He knew what he had to do next. The following morning came softly. The sun broke through the curtains, spilling a line of light across the room. Keanu stood by the window, sipping his tea this time instead of letting it grow cold. He felt calm not because the world had changed overnight, but because he finally knew what he wanted to do. He sat at his desk again and opened the journal to a clean page. The ink from the night before had dried into firm, steady lines. He wrote one final note beneath it. Change doesn't start when the world apologizes. It starts when someone chooses not to hate back. He closed the book, slipping it into his bag, along with his car keys. On his way out, he paused briefly at the door, taking one last look around his home. It was quiet, ordinary, and peaceful, exactly the kind of life he valued most. Outside, the city was already alive with noise, but he felt apart from it, as if he were moving through a different rhythm. He got into his car, started the engine, and let the sound of it settle him. As the tires rolled across the asphalt, he looked toward the horizon. The dealership waited somewhere on the other side of the city. He wasn't going there for revenge or recognition. He was going there to remind the world, and perhaps one man, that redemption always begins with grace. 3 days passed before Keanu Reeves returned to the dealership. The morning was gray, the kind of light that made the city look muted and distant. As his car rolled to a stop outside Cole and Whitman Automotive, he noticed how empty the lot was. The lines where luxury cars once stood were now bare. The massive glass panels that had once reflected power and pride now reflected silence. He stepped out and paused for a moment, his hands in his jacket pockets. There were no cameras this time, no reporters waiting for him, no crowd. The chaos of the internet had moved on to new headlines, but for the people inside, the aftermath was far from over. When he opened the door, the same faint chime echoed through the room, though this time, no one greeted him. The air was thick and cold. Several employees looked up briefly, their eyes widening when they recognized him, then quickly turned away, pretending to be busy. Their faces carried guilt and unease. The showroom that had once buzzed with noise was now hollow. The polished floors seemed dimmer, the walls stripped of their confidence. Keanu walked slowly toward the car that had drawn him here in the first place, the 1969 Mustang. It sat in the same spot, but something about it felt different now. The reflection of its polished body seemed almost too bright against the subdued room. He reached out and touched the hood gently, running his fingertips along the curve of the metal. The surface was cold, smooth, unchanged. Yet, the meaning behind the touch had shifted entirely. The first time, he had stood here as a stranger, being judged. Now he stood as someone who had nothing to prove. Behind the counter, Richard Cole stood still. His once perfect posture had wilted. He wore no suit jacket today, just a wrinkled shirt and a face drained of color. His eyes followed Keanu cautiously, uncertain whether to approach or stay hidden. There was no arrogance left, only the quiet weight of a man who had seen his own downfall in full daylight. Richard hesitated behind the counter, frozen between shame and the faint instinct to defend himself. His mind raced with every headline, every angry comment, every sleepless night, replaying what he'd done. He had built his life around control, but now he was standing in front of the very man who had shown him what real control looked like. Keanu didn't speak at first. He continued to look at the car, taking in every small detail: the texture of the leather seats, the curve of the chrome trim, the faint scent of oil and time. It wasn't about money or reputation anymore. It was about reflection. The car symbolized what he had come here for in the first place: something meaningful, something built to last. Finally, Richard stepped forward, his voice unsteady. "Mr. Reeves," he said quietly, I didn't expect you to come back." Keanu turned to face him. "I didn't come here for the car," he said calmly. Richard nodded quickly, his throat tightening. "I know. His voice cracked. "I've said a lot of things that I can't take back. I've treated people in ways that I'm not proud of." Keanu said nothing. He just listened. The silence between them wasn't harsh. It was heavy, but cleansing. Richard went on, his words trembling. "I wanted to apologize, not because of the video or the backlash, because I saw myself in that clip, and I didn't like what I saw." For a moment, Keanu studied him, not with pity, but with quiet understanding. "It takes courage to admit that," he said softly. "Most people never do." Richard swallowed hard, looking down at the floor. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it." Keanu nodded once. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for. It's something you earn by how you live afterward." Those words settled in the air like truth spoken out loud for the first time. Richard looked up, his eyes glassy but steady, as if the fog inside him had finally begun to clear. Keanu stepped closer to the car again, placing a hand on the hood one last time. His voice was quiet, but certain. "You can rebuild what's broken, Richard. You just have to start with yourself." Richard stood motionless, the words hanging in the still air. For the first time in days, he didn't feel defensive or angry, only humbled. Keanu's tone wasn't condemning. It was steady, almost gentle. It wasn't the voice of a man seeking revenge. It was the voice of someone who had already made peace. Keanu gave the Mustang one last glance, then turned toward the exit. His footsteps echoed softly through the empty room. When he reached the door, he paused, glancing back just once. "You were right about one thing. This car isn't for everyone. It's for people who understand what second chances look like." Richard couldn't speak. He only nodded, his throat tightening with unspoken gratitude. As the door closed behind Keanu, the room fell silent again. But this time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like the start of something different. Richard stood there for a long while, looking at the car that had started everything. For the first time, he saw it the way Keanu had seen it, not as a symbol of luxury, but of restoration. Outside, Keanu walked toward his car, under the soft gray sky. The city hummed faintly in the distance. He didn't smile, but his eyes held quiet relief. He hadn't gone there to change the past. He had gone there to let it finally rest. Richard hesitated before following Keanu out to the parking lot, his steps slow and unsure. He had spent days rehearsing what to say, but now that the moment was here, every word felt inadequate. The sunlight hit his face as he stepped outside, but even the warmth couldn't erase the cold pit in his chest. Keanu was standing near his car, leaning slightly against the door, the quiet strength in his posture unchanged. "Mr. Reeves," Richard began, his voice cracking slightly. "Please, just a minute of your time." Keanu turned to face him. His expression wasn't cold, but it wasn't inviting either. "You've already said what mattered," he replied softly. Richard shook his head, struggling to steady his breathing. "No, that wasn't enough. I didn't really say what I meant. I've had time to think about everything. About the video, about how I treated you, and not just you, but everyone who ever walked through those doors." Keanu stayed silent, giving him space to continue. "I thought I was protecting the image of the business," Richard said. "But what I was really protecting was my ego. I've been like that for years. The money, the status, it all made me blind. When I saw you walk in, dressed like that, I didn't see a person. I saw what I thought was beneath me." He took a deep breath, his hands shaking. I've lost everything because of that. My job, my reputation, my peace. But when I watched that video again, I realized the worst thing I lost was my decency. And that's on me. Keanu's gaze softened, though his face remained calm. At least you can see it now, he said. Some people never do. I don't deserve forgiveness, Richard said, his voice low. But I just wanted to ask you to believe that I'm trying to change. Not for the cameras, not for the public, but because I can't live with who I was that day. Keanu looked at him quietly, the silence between them long but not uncomfortable. Change starts when you stop performing, he said. And right now, you sound like a man who's finally stopped. The wind rustled softly between them, carrying with it the faint hum of distant traffic. Richard stood there, shoulders heavy, eyes lowered as if he could still feel the weight of every mistake he had ever made pressing down on him. For a long moment, Keanu said nothing. He just looked at the man who once stood so high above others and now barely had the strength to lift his head. Finally, Keanu spoke. "This was never about me, Richard," he said, quietly. "It was about how you see people. How easily we forget that respect doesn't depend on status or money. It's supposed to come naturally. The moment we start deciding who deserves it, we lose something human inside us." Richard swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see that now, but I can't undo what's been done." "No," Keanu replied, his tone steady, "but you can stop repeating it." The door behind them opened, and a few employees stepped outside, drawn by the quiet intensity of the conversation. They lingered near the entrance, pretending to tidy displays or check their phones, but their eyes were fixed on the two men. The same people who had once watched the humiliation unfold were now witnesses to something completely different. Richard took a hesitant step closer. "When I saw that video online," he said, "I didn't see Keanu Reeves, the celebrity. I saw a man who had every reason to humiliate me, but didn't. I've spent my life teaching others that power means control. You showed me it means restraint." Keanu's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "Power without compassion destroys. Respect without humility turns into pride. You can build an empire that way, but not a life." Richard nodded, tears welling up but unshed. He looked toward the dealership behind him, the place he had ruled like a throne, and for the first time, it looked small. "I think I understand," he said softly. Keanu turned toward his car, his hand resting on the door handle. "Then you're already on your way," he said. The words weren't grand, but they landed with the weight of truth. Richard felt them settle deep in his chest, like the first real breath after years of silence. Keanu opened the car door, but paused before stepping inside. He looked back at Richard one last time, his tone steady yet filled with quiet conviction. "You can polish a car's surface until it shines," he said, "but you can't polish a conscience. The only way to make it right is to live differently from this moment on." Richard nodded slowly, unable to find words. The employees behind him stood frozen, their faces reflecting the same mixture of awe and guilt. For the first time, they saw their former boss not as a figure of authority, but as a man stripped of pride, facing the truth head-on. Keanu straightened, the faintest sigh leaving his chest. "I came here once, looking for a car," he continued. "But now I realize I found something more valuable. A reminder that dignity doesn't depend on how the world sees us, but on how we see each other." He gave a small nod, a gesture of closure rather than farewell. Then, without waiting for applause or acknowledgement, he slid into his car and started the engine. The low rumble filled the quiet air. As he drove away, Richard remained where he stood, watching the car disappear into the gray light. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful or defeated. He simply felt human, and that, he realized, was the beginning of change. 2 days later, Keanu Reeves drove across the edge of Los Angeles, far from the glass towers and luxury districts that filled the headlines. The city slowly gave way to small repair shops, old gas stations, and quiet streets where people still waved to each other from porches. He turned down a narrow road lined with palm trees and faded billboards until he spotted a small sign that read, Hernandez Family Motors, honest cars, honest people. The lot was modest, maybe 20 cars in total, most of them decades old. There was no polished marble floor or shimmering chandeliers, just cracked pavement, sunlight, and the faint sound of a radio playing old soul music from a nearby workshop. It was simple, real. An older man stepped out from the garage, wiping his hands with a rag. He looked to be in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and warm brown eyes that seemed to have seen both hardship and hope. "Morning, friend," he called out with a friendly smile. "Looking for something special or just browsing?" Keanu smiled back, slipping his hands into his jacket pockets. "A little of both, I think," he said. The man chuckled. "Name's Sam Hernandez. Welcome to my little kingdom of rust and dreams." There was no recognition in his voice, no double take, no awkward surprise at who stood before him, just sincerity. And that alone was refreshing. Keanu glanced around, admiring the worn charm of the place. The cars weren't perfect, but they had stories. Every dent, every faded stripe carried years of someone's life. "I'm looking for something with history," Keanu said thoughtfully. "Something I can fix up myself." Sam's eyes lit up. "Then you'll want to see the '67 Impala out back. She's got her flaws, but she's got heart." He led Keanu through the rows until they reached a faded blue Impala resting under a patch of sunlight. The paint was chipped, the chrome dull, but there was something quietly beautiful about it. Keanu ran, his hand across the hood, feeling the roughness beneath his palm. "She's perfect," he said softly. Sam watched Keanu inspect the Impala, with the kind of care only someone who truly loved machines could give. "Not many folks look at her that way anymore," Sam said, his voice carrying both pride and nostalgia. "Most people come in asking for the newest thing, the flashiest paint, the biggest engine. But you're seeing her for what she could be." Keanu smiled faintly. "Sometimes what's old just needs someone to believe in it again." Sam grinned. "That's a good way to put it. You sound like my late wife," she used to say. "Every broken thing just needs the right hands." For a moment, both men were quiet. The sound of a wrench clinking on the workbench drifted from the garage. A breeze stirred the dust across the lot. There was no tension here, no pretense, just two men talking, surrounded by honest labor. "How long have you been running this place?" Keanu asked. "Almost 30 years, Sam said. "Started with 2 cars and a prayer. My kids help out when they can, though most of them moved out of town for work. Business isn't what it used to be, but this shop's my home. Keeps me grounded." Keanu nodded. "It shows. There's soul in this place." Sam smiled again, his weathered face softening. "So, you think you might take her home?" Keanu looked at the Impala one more time. He didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I think I will. But not for me. I want to restore it and use it for something good. Maybe auction it for a charity." Sam's eyes widened slightly, clearly surprised. "That's a rare thing these days," he said. "Most people buy to show off, not to give back." Keanu shrugged gently. "Respect and kindness, those are the real luxuries. The rest fades." Sam extended his hand, grease and all. "Then you picked the right car, friend, and the right place." Keanu shook it firmly, the handshake, simple but meaningful. An unspoken understanding between two men who valued more than what could be bought. Later that afternoon, the paperwork was signed. The deal sealed with another warm handshake. There was no salesman's pitch, no fancy contract, just trust. Sam even insisted on knocking a few $100s off the price, saying, "If it's going to charity, that's my small part in it." Keanu smiled. "You already did your part. You reminded me what respect feels like." As he drove the old Impala off the lot, the sun dipped low behind the hills, bathing the car in gold. The ride was rough, the steering a little stiff, but the feeling in his chest was light. The machine rumbled beneath him, steady and alive, an echo of everything that mattered. That evening, he parked by the ocean and snapped a simple photo of the car against the setting sun. Then he posted it online with a caption that read, "True luxury is being treated with respect. Thank you, Sam Hernandez, for reminding me of that." Within hours, The post went viral. People shared it, quoted it, and praised the small dealership that treated a stranger like family. Once again, the world saw that humility could turn anger into grace, and that Keanu Reeves didn't just talk about kindness, he lived it. By morning, Keanu's post had become more than just a viral photo. It had become a message that resonated across the world. The simple caption, "True luxury is being treated with respect," appeared on millions of screens, reposted and rephrased in every language imaginable. News outlets called it the most powerful social statement of the year. On social media, two hashtags began to dominate. Number "Respect is luxury" and number "Learn from Keanu." What started as a reaction to one man's humility evolved into a global reflection. People from every walk of life began sharing their own experiences. Moments when they had been judged for their clothes, their accent, their job, or their background. Others posted about strangers who had treated them with unexpected kindness. A woman from Chicago wrote, "I'm a waitress. People ignore me all the time. But after watching what Keanu did, I promise to keep showing kindness even when others don't." Her post received over 1 million likes. A taxi driver from India posted a selfie with the caption, "Respect has no currency. It's free to give." That line went viral on its own, echoing Keanu's philosophy and simple truth. Television networks picked up the wave. Morning anchors called it the Keanu effect, a movement that wasn't built on outrage, but on empathy. The story began shifting from what had happened in that dealership to what it revealed about society. Experts, teachers, and business leaders joined the discussion, exploring how respect and humility could be restored in workplaces, schools, and communities. Even corporate brands started to pay attention. A luxury hotel chain released a statement pledging to train staff on human-first hospitality. A major clothing retailer announced a new initiative called "Every Customer Counts," crediting Keanu's message as inspiration. The world wasn't just talking, it was beginning to act. Through it all, Keanu remained silent. He didn't issue statements or schedule interviews. His silence spoke louder than words, allowing the message to belong not to him, but to everyone who understood it. As the days passed, the movement only grew stronger. Newspapers ran features not about celebrity drama, but about human change. One headline read, "From viral video to global awakening." Another simply said, "Keanu Reeves reminds the world to be kind." In schools, teachers began using the incident as a lesson on empathy. One classroom in Texas created a wall where students could write one act of kindness they had experienced or given that week. Within days, it was covered with colorful notes, small gestures, quiet stories, reminders that decency still existed. On talk shows, psychologists and sociologists discussed why the world had responded so deeply. "It's because people are tired of cruelty," one expert said. Keanu didn't fight back with anger, he fought back with grace. And grace, when seen in public, heals something in all of us. The movement reached corporate boardrooms too. CEOs began discussing how to retrain customer-facing employees to prioritize dignity over sales. One company executive said during a live interview, "You can't fake humanity anymore. People want authenticity, not performance." Keanu's moment proved that humility is good business. Stories began emerging from small towns to major cities of people acting differently. A clerk in New York refused to let a homeless man leave hungry and handed him a sandwich instead. A teenager in London stood up to defend an elderly bus passenger from mockery. In each story's comment section, the same words appeared. Number "Respect is luxury." For Keanu, watching this transformation from afar was both humbling and surreal. Friends texted him news articles, telling him how his single act of restraint had become a symbol of something bigger than himself. He replied only once, saying, "If it makes people think twice before judging, enough." The dealership that had once symbolized arrogance now became a footnote in a far greater narrative. The focus had shifted from one man's mistake to a collective rediscovery of kindness. What began as a viral moment was turning into something timeless, a quiet movement, reminding millions that decency, not fame, was the measure of greatness. By the end of the week, number "Respect is luxury" had become more than a trend, it was a philosophy. News anchors called it a cultural reset, a moment when people remembered what truly mattered. Across continents, strangers shared the same language of decency, proving that respect could connect people in ways politics and wealth never could. Keanu's quiet gesture had outgrown the moment it was born from. Artists began painting murals of him beside quotes from his post. Schools organized kindness days in his honor. Even companies that had once ignored social issues began highlighting stories of empathy among employees. For the first time in years, the world's attention wasn't fixed on division, it was focused on humanity. Keanu never sought credit for any of it. He continued his life in simplicity, driving his restored Impala through quiet streets, stopping to talk with strangers, giving small gestures that never made the news. But wherever he went, people looked at him not as a star, but as a reminder that gentleness could change the world. The dealership scandal faded from headlines, but the lesson it sparked didn't. In its place grew a global awareness that real luxury isn't in money, or power, or fame. It's in respect. And as long as people remembered that, the world would never be the same again. The fall of Cole and Whitman Automotive was swift and merciless. Within a month of the viral scandal, the dealership that had once been the pride of Beverly Hills had become a ghost of itself. Contracts were canceled, luxury brands withdrew their vehicles, and customers who once fought for appointments now refused to step through the door. The building that had once gleamed with opulence now sat in uneasy silence, its polished floors echoing the emptiness left behind. Inside, Richard Cole sat alone in his glass-walled office. The same office where he had once barked orders and boasted of sales figures now felt like a cage. The plaques on the wall celebrating Top Dealer of the Year seemed to mock him. His phone no longer rang with opportunity, only with journalists or lawyers. That morning, an email arrived from corporate headquarters. He already knew what it would say before opening it. The subject line was simple: termination of employment. He read the first few lines before closing his laptop, his hands trembling slightly. There was no anger left in him, no defense to give, only exhaustion. Later that afternoon, the news broke publicly. Headlines spread across every business channel. Cole and Whitman fires manager at center of viral controversy. Commentators described it as inevitable. Social media, which had once condemned his arrogance, now treated his firing as poetic justice. Richard watched the coverage from his office window, his reflection blending with the empty showroom behind him. He could still remember the moment he had tried to assert his power over Keanu Reeves, believing that money defined worth. Now, stripped of his title, he understood the irony. He had spent his life chasing the illusion of success, and in doing so, had lost the one thing that mattered: respect. That evening, he turned off the lights in his office and sat in the dark, listening to the soft hum of the city outside. For the first time, he didn't feel superior to it. He felt small, ordinary, and painfully aware of how far he'd fallen. The following week, a major news network aired a half-hour investigative documentary titled The Dealership Deception. It opened with footage of the viral incident, then expanded into interviews with former employees, customers, and business analysts. One after another, they spoke about years of intimidation, favoritism, and arrogance that had shaped the dealership's culture. A former saleswoman described how Richard would scold her in front of clients for not looking expensive enough. Another said he once lost a sale because he dared to speak kindly to a customer who wasn't dressed in luxury clothing. Their testimonies were raw, emotional, and damning. Richard watched the program from the worn couch of his small apartment. His world had grown smaller, no assistants, no meetings, no entourage, just silence. On the screen, his former staff talked about the fear they used to feel in his presence. Each word landed like a stone on his chest. When the documentary cut to the footage of Keanu's calm, steady voice, Richard turned up the volume instinctively. There was Keanu again, standing in the dealership, saying with quiet conviction, "Violence doesn't prove power. It reveals weakness." Then came the final line that had circled the world: "Respect doesn't cost a thing." Hearing it now, in the quiet of his empty living room, Richard felt something inside him break. His throat tightened. For months, he had blamed bad luck, the internet, and public outrage. But for the first time, he stopped searching for excuses. The problem wasn't the world, it was him. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the screen, as if trying to see himself through Keanu's eyes. A version of himself he no longer wanted to recognize. When the program ended, Richard didn't move for a long time. The words still echoed in his head, looping endlessly until they no longer sounded like someone else's wisdom, but like a truth he had needed to hear all his life. Long after the documentary ended, Richard remained sitting in the dark, the glow of the paused screen reflecting faintly across his face. Outside, the city carried on without him. Cars passed, voices faded. Life continued. But inside that small room, something shifted. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about the damage to his career or his reputation. He was thinking about the people he had hurt. He thought of the employees he had humiliated, the customers he had dismissed, and the moment when he'd raised his hand toward a man who never lifted his in return. That memory burned more deeply than any punishment the world could give him. He walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights. They flickered like tiny reminders that even in darkness, some things could still shine. He whispered the words quietly, almost afraid to hear them aloud. Respect doesn't cost a thing. The phrase lingered in the room, simple yet powerful. For the first time, he understood what it truly meant, not as a quote that had haunted the news, but as a truth he had ignored all his life. He turned off the television, the room falling completely silent. Then, slowly, he smiled not out of joy, but out of understanding. He knew redemption wouldn't come quickly, but for the first time in years, he was ready to earn it. 6 months later, the world gathered under the glowing lights of a Los Angeles charity gala, unaware that the night would mark a quiet milestone of redemption and remembrance. On the center stage sat a gleaming blue 1967 Chevrolet Impala, the same car Keanu had purchased from Sam Hernandez. The once faded metal now shimmered under soft gold lighting, restored with precision and care. Every curve reflected patience. Every polished detail carried a story. Keanu stood at the edge of the crowd, wearing his familiar black suit and calm expression. He wasn't there for the spotlight. He was there for purpose. The car wasn't just an item for sale. It was a tribute to his late friend Jake Lawson, the stuntman who had once risked his life for him and whose memory had quietly guided every step since the incident at the dealership. The auction hall was filled with people from around the world, actors, athletes, philanthropists, and ordinary citizens who had been touched by the message of respect. The hum of conversation quieted as the host stepped onto the stage, his voice rich with reverence. "Tonight," he announced, "we present something extraordinary. Not just a restored classic car, but a symbol of compassion, humility, and second chances." Applause filled the room, gentle at first, then rising into a wave of emotion. The crowd's eyes turned toward Keanu. The host gestured toward him, inviting him forward. For a brief second, he hesitated, then walked to the microphone with steady steps, the audience falling completely silent. He looked at the Impala before speaking, his voice low but clear. This car began as a dream. It became a reminder. It was built by people who cared not for fame or fortune, but for meaning. The proceeds from tonight will fund scholarships for young people who want to study mechanical engineering, kids who might one day build something better, not just with their hands, but with their hearts. His words carried through the play. Hall, quiet yet powerful, like a steady heartbeat beneath the noise of the world. Keanu paused for a moment, letting his words settle. The audience remained silent, listening intently. Then he continued, his tone filled with sincerity rather than performance. "A car can't change the world," he said, "but respect can. When you choose kindness in a place where arrogance usually wins, that's when change begins." He glanced around the room, his gaze resting briefly on the young students seated near the front, those who would soon receive the scholarships funded by the auction. "These scholarships aren't just for education," he added. They're a reminder that opportunity should never depend on what someone wears, where they come from, or what they can afford. It should depend on heart, determination, and dignity. Applause broke out softly, then grew louder, until the room filled with it. Keanu nodded once in gratitude, then stepped away from the microphone. He didn't linger in the spotlight, but the sincerity of his presence lingered in the air. The auctioneer stepped forward and began the bidding. The numbers climbed rapidly. 50,000, 100, 200, 500,000. The audience gasped. As the total kept rising, people weren't just bidding for a car, they were bidding for meaning, for the story that had reminded the world what decency looked like. When the final gavel struck, the winning bid reached $2 million more than anyone expected. The crowd erupted in applause, some standing, others wiping tears from their eyes. Cameras flashed, capturing Keanu's quiet smile, but his eyes reflected something deeper than joy. It was gratitude. Gratitude that something born from humiliation and misunderstanding had become a beacon of hope. After the applause faded, Keanu stepped aside, shaking hands with donors and greeting the scholarship recipients. One young student, maybe 16, approached nervously and said, "Mr. Reeves, I want to study engineering because of what you did. Not just the car, how you handled everything." Keanu smiled gently. "Then you already understand what matters most," he said. "Build something that lasts longer than applause." The boy nodded, his eyes bright with determination, and Keanu could see in him the spark of everything this night was meant to inspire. As the evening drew to a close, the Impala was rolled off the stage under a soft glow of light. The crowd rose to their feet, not out of admiration for the car itself, but for what it had come to represent: a second chance, a lesson born from humility, and a legacy of quiet strength. Reporters surrounded Keanu as he prepared to leave, microphones ready, cameras flashing. He stopped only once, turning to address them briefly. "I didn't build this movement," he said. "People did. All I did was remind the world of something it already knew, that kindness still matters." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was sincere. People felt the weight of his words, the authenticity behind them. It wasn't a speech crafted for headlines, it was truth spoken without expectation. Later that night, Keanu stood alone by the car one last time. The hall was nearly empty, the noise gone, replaced by the faint echo of his own footsteps. He rested his hand on the hood, the cool surface reflecting the soft light. "Jake," he whispered, "we did it." Outside, the Los Angeles sky shimmered with city lights. Somewhere, lives would change because of what had happened that night. The car had fulfilled its purpose, but the message would live far beyond it, proof that even the smallest act of respect can ripple through the world. A full year passed since the night of the charity auction. Seasons changed, headlines faded, and life returned to its quiet rhythm. Yet some moments refused to disappear. They lived on in the corners of memory where lessons outlast applause. For Keanu Reeves, that night wasn't about fame or money. It was about closure. But the story that had begun in arrogance and ended in grace still had one more chapter to write. On a calm Sunday morning, Keanu sat at his kitchen table, sunlight spilling across a stack of letters. Most were fan mail, warm, kind, and full of gratitude. But one stood out. It was handwritten, the envelope plain, the return address from a small town in Northern California. The handwriting was neat but hesitant, as if the writer had thought carefully before every stroke of the pen. Keanu slid a finger under the flap and unfolded the pages inside. At the top was a simple greeting. "Mr. Reeves," it began. "I don't expect you to remember me, but I remember you every day." He paused, recognizing the signature before he even reached the end. It was from Richard Cole. The words were steady, remorseful, and deeply human. "I've spent the last year rebuilding not my reputation, but my character. Losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to see what kind of man I had become. For a long time, I blamed the world. Then I realized the problem wasn't the world, it was the mirror. Keanu leaned back in his chair, reading slowly. There was no bitterness in the letter, only gratitude. When you stopped my punch that day, you didn't just stop my hand, you stopped the part of me that had forgotten decency. I've spent this year learning to start again, the right way. Keanu smiled faintly, already sensing where the letter was leading. The letter continued, the words written with care, each one carrying the weight of sincerity. After I was fired, I didn't know who I was without the title, the office, the control. 4 months, I drifted. But one day, I remembered what you told me, that forgiveness isn't something you ask for, it's something you earn by how you live afterward. Keanu's eyes softened as he read. I took that to heart, the letter went on. I sold my car, my watch, everything that tied me to the man I used to be. I moved north, away from the noise, and found a job at a small community garage. It's run by a retired mechanic named Paul who believes in giving second chances to people and to cars. He didn't ask about my past. He just handed me a wrench and said, if you're here to work, then work. Keanu could almost hear the humility in those words. The letter described how Richard had begun teaching teenagers from struggling neighborhoods, basic auto repair kids who had been written off by society. They come in rough around the edges, he wrote, but I see myself in them. Every time I teach them how to fix a dent or replace a part, I tell them what you told me. Respect isn't earned by how much you have, but by how you treat people. Keanu paused and let out a slow breath, deeply moved. The transformation described wasn't dramatic. It was honest, quiet, and real. Sometimes the kids ask me why I smile when I'm covered in grease, the letter continued. I tell them it's because I finally understand what real work feels like, the kind that builds people instead of breaking them down. I don't run a dealership anymore. I run a place where everyone's worth the same no matter what they wear when they walk through the door. At the bottom of the page, the ink had smudged slightly, as though written with damp eyes. You taught me that momentary humiliation can lead to lifelong humility. Thank you for showing me that strength doesn't shout, it listens. Keanu folded the letter carefully, his chest heavy with quiet emotion. Keanu unfolded the last page slowly, the soft paper rustling under his fingers. The letter continued, each line more heartfelt than the last. I don't expect you to reply, Richard wrote. In fact, I hope you don't feel you have to. This isn't about closure, it's about gratitude. I don't think I'll ever forget that day at the dealership, the moment I thought I had power, and the moment I realized what real power looks like. You didn't humiliate me, even when you could have. You gave me something far more valuable, a chance to see who I really was. Keanu exhaled quietly, his eyes fixed on the sunlight reflecting off the page. There was no trace of the arrogant man from before, only humility written in ink. I still remember your words, the letter continued. You can polish a car's surface, but you can't polish a conscience. I've kept that line taped above the workbench in the garage. It reminds me every day that respect doesn't live in titles, or wealth, or reputation. It lives in how we treat people when no one's watching. That idea saved me. Keanu smiled faintly. It wasn't the proud smile of accomplishment, but the quiet, emotional kind that comes from knowing something you did had truly mattered. The letter went on. The garage has become a home for the lost and the learning. We fix old engines, repaint fenders, and rebuild confidence. Every week, I watch these kids walk in with doubt and walk out believing in themselves. I tell them about that day not to make you look like a hero, but to show them that even the worst moment of your life can be the start of something better if you face it with honesty. Keanu paused, reading the next line twice. One of the boys asked me what happened to you after that. I told him you didn't just walk out of a dealership, you walked into people's hearts. You made the world remember that humility isn't weakness, it's strength in its purest form. The last paragraph was short, but it carried more meaning than all the words before it. Thank you for your patience that day. It cost you nothing, but it gave me everything. If you're ever passing through Redwood Valley, stop by the garage. The coffee's terrible, but the company's good. With respect, always, Richard Cole. Keanu sat back in his chair. the letter resting loosely in his hand. For a long while, he didn't move. The city outside was alive with sound, but in his kitchen, time felt still. He finally placed the letter beside his journal and whispered softly, "You did it, Richard." As sunlight warmed the room, Keanu poured himself a fresh cup of coffee. He looked out the window, not with pride, but with peace. The lesson had come full circle. A moment of restraint had become a lifetime of redemption, and somewhere in a quiet town, a man who once forgot what respect meant was now teaching it every day. The California coast stretched endlessly before him, a ribbon of gold and blue bathed in the afternoon sun. Keanu guided the restored Mustang along the winding highway, the sound of the ocean blending with the low hum of the engine. The breeze swept through the open windows, carrying the scent of salt and freedom. The car wasn't just a machine anymore, it was a symbol of everything that had come full circle. His hands rested loosely on the wheel, eyes steady on the horizon. The past year had been a journey he never intended to start, but one that had changed lives far beyond his own. Somewhere behind him, in a small-town garage, Richard was teaching a new generation about respect. Somewhere across the world, strangers were treating each other a little kinder because of a moment that had begun in silence and restraint. Keanu's voice, calm and reflective, filled the quiet space. "Kindness doesn't need recognition. It just needs courage," he said softly, almost to himself. "Courage to stay calm when it's easier to fight. Courage to listen when the world is shouting. Courage to forgive when pride tells you not to." The sun began to sink lower, painting the ocean in amber and crimson hues. Every mile he drove felt lighter, as if each turn washed away a little more of the weight of the world. He thought of Jake, his late stuntman friend, and smiled. The scholarships created in his memory were thriving. Dozens of students were now studying engineering young minds, driven by curiosity and heart, not privilege. A motorcycle passed by, its rider giving a friendly nod. Keanu nodded back. The moment was small but meaningful, a reminder that connection didn't always need words. Sometimes respect was as simple as acknowledgement, as silent as shared understanding. He slowed the car as he approached a lookout point, pulling over to where the cliffs met the sky. For a long moment, he sat in stillness, watching the waves crash below each one, a rhythm of persistence, rising and falling, yet never giving up. It reminded him of humanity itself, flawed, relentless, and beautiful. Keanu stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching softly beneath his boots. The wind brushed through his hair, carrying the distant roar of the Pacific. For a while, he said nothing. He simply stood there, watching the horizon where sky and sea touched in perfect stillness. It was moments like this that reminded him why peace had to start within before it could reach anyone else. He leaned against the hood of the Mustang and pulled from his pocket a small, worn notebook, the same one he used to write his reflections after every life-changing moment. He opened to a blank page and wrote slowly, the ink steady under his hand. "Kindness doesn't always change the world, but it changes someone's world, and that's enough." He smiled faintly as the words settled on the page. Then he looked up again, thinking of all the people who had reached out since that day at the dealership. Factory workers, teachers, nurses, and even children had written to say how the story made them think twice before judging someone by appearance. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about what the story had sparked in others. A gentle wave of emotion rose in his chest. For years he had lived quietly, staying away from the noise of fame. But this felt different. This wasn't publicity. It was purpose, a movement born from a moment of dignity, rather than defiance. The sky deepened to gold, the waves shimmering like liquid fire below. Keanu closed the notebook and whispered softly, "You can't always stop the world from being harsh, but you can refuse to add to its cruelty." He walked back to the car and rested his hands on the roof, feeling the cool metal beneath his palms. Somewhere, Richard was probably teaching a class right now. Somewhere, a kid was fixing his first car, learning that success wasn't about impressing people, but about improving lives. And somewhere, maybe unseen, Another story was already beginning because one act of grace always inspires another. Keanu opened the driver's door, took one last look at the ocean, and smiled. The journey wasn't ending. It was only continuing on quieter roads, through kinder hearts. As the last light of day began to fade, Keanu slid back into the Mustang and started the engine. The soft rumble filled the stillness, blending with the distant crash of waves. He drove slowly along the coast, the headlights sweeping across the empty road ahead. Each mile felt like a meditation, a reminder that peace was not found in applause but in purpose. He thought about everything that had unfolded over the past year: the humiliation, the silence, the forgiveness, and finally, the transformation. What began as an act of restraint had turned into something far greater than he'd ever intended. A single decision not to fight had echoed through millions of hearts. It was proof that gentleness, when chosen deliberately, could be the most powerful force in the world. As the Mustang glided around a curve overlooking the ocean, Keanu's voice returned in quiet reflection. "The world will always have arrogance, judgment, and pride," he said softly. "But it's up to each of us to decide how we answer it. Kindness isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Respect isn't a luxury, it's humanity. And sometimes, all it takes to change a life is a moment of grace." He smiled faintly, the lights of a small town appearing in the distance. The same kind of town where Richard now taught young people about rebuilding engines and themselves. Somewhere, that man was laughing with his students, passing down not just skills, but humility. The thought filled Keanu with quiet pride, not in the man he was, but in the chain of kindness that had followed. The road stretched ahead, endless and open, as if inviting him to keep going. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and whispered one last thought to the wind. "Never judge by appearance. Treat everyone with respect. You never know whose story you're part of." The car continued down the coast, fading into the horizon. In the background, images flashed, like memories. The young scholarship students in their classrooms, Sam Hernandez, still running his small dealership with warmth, Richard guiding kids through the hum of a workshop, and strangers around the world sharing stories under the banner of number, "Respect is luxury." The movement lived on, not through words or headlines, but through simple actions: a door held open, a kind word offered, a judgment withheld. The screen faded to black as Keanu's voice lingered one last time, steady and sincere. Kindness doesn't need an audience. It only needs a beginning. And as the music rose softly beneath his final words, two questions appeared on the screen for the viewers to carry with them. Have you ever been judged for how you looked? What story should Keanu's kindness inspire next?